All right, let's talk about India in 2025. It was a year that, well, really pushed the nation to its absolute limits. But it also became this incredibly important moment of reflection and, believe it or not, growth. We're going to break down the challenges, uncover some of the hidden strengths that really came to the surface, and explore the huge lessons learned from a time that truly reshaped the country's future. So, let's dive in.
This quote really hits the nail on the head. It perfectly sets the stage for what we're talking about today. The goal here isn't to point fingers or assign blame for the chaos of 2025. It's about understanding how powerful it is to look inward. It's about how a nation, when it's under an unbelievable amount of pressure, can actually choose to learn and get stronger instead of just lashing out. And that right there, that's the big question we're tackling. When you go through a collective hardship like that, what do you come away with? What are the real insights? This isn't just about looking back at history, it's about finding the wisdom that was forged in the fire. So, let's get into our first section, a year of reckoning. Before we can even talk about the lessons learned, we have to understand just how big the challenge was. See, 2025 wasn't just another tough year. It was more like a pressure cooker, where all these tensions that had been simmering for ages finally and forcefully boiled over. And the pressure was just immense. This wasn't some abstract crisis happening far away in government offices. No, this was a stress test that hit everyone, everywhere. From students trying to figure out their future to families just trying to get by, that strain was felt across the board. And it really tested the strength of the country's core institutions. Okay, on to our next section, the anatomy of a crisis. To really get what happened in 2025, we've got to look at how all the different pressures were connected. This wasn't just one single bad event. It was more like a perfect storm, a whole bunch of factors coming together at once to create this massive wave of social and economic stress. And this is so important to understand. These issues weren't happening in isolation. Think of them like a set of interconnected gears. A problem with internal security would start turning the gear of social unrest. That, in turn, would crank up the economic anxiety people were feeling. And all of it, working together, just ground down public trust, creating this vicious cycle that was incredibly hard to stop. And smack in the middle of all of this, social media. It was this total double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave a voice to so many people who needed to be heard, which was fantastic. But on the other hand, it became a super spreader for rumors, misinformation, and half-truths, making it almost impossible to have a calm, reasonable conversation. You can really see the emotional cost right here. The national conversation wasn't being driven by thoughtful debate. It was being fueled by pure, raw emotion, anger, fear, anxiety, and just this growing distrust. It created this incredibly toxic environment, and you have to imagine it was especially tough for young people and students trying to find their way in all that uncertainty. But here's where the story takes a really crucial turn, leading us to Section 3, India's unseen strengths. Because in spite of all that chaos, the country didn't fall apart. It held. So what were the hidden pillars? What were the quiet forces that kept everything together when it felt like it was all about to break? The answer really was these silent pillars. While the public square was filled with noise and anger, it was the quiet, disciplined, day-in, day-out work of millions of people that kept the country stable. We're talking about the armed forces, doctors and nurses, teachers, and just regular citizens who became the bedrock of society simply by showing up and doing their jobs with a sense of purpose. This scorecard gives you a perfect snapshot of that resilience. On the left, you see all the areas under massive stress. But then look at the right. You see the strengths that held firm and acted as a counterbalance. Sure, there was social unrest, but the democratic systems, while strained, kept working. Public trust was low, but key institutions kept doing their duty. The takeaway is that the fundamental framework of the nation actually held up. And you know what's truly remarkable? All of this internal turmoil didn't completely torpedo India's standing in the world. Its core economic, military, and diplomatic power acted like a buffer, making sure it was still a major player on the global stage. It was this powerful reminder that a tough period at home doesn't have to define a nation's destiny. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important section, lessons for the future. Okay, so we weathered the storm. Now what? What wisdom can we pull from all that difficulty? This is all about boiling down the experience of 2025 into a clear plan for what needs to happen next. If you had to pick just one lesson from 2025, one big flashing lights takeaway, it would be this: the principle of informed reasoning. The whole year was a stark warning about what happens when public conversation is driven by unchecked emotion. The lesson was that we desperately need to get back to a culture where calm, fact-based discussion is valued way more than outrage.
And that big idea of informed reasoning leads directly to this four-step game plan. It all starts with leadership that is calm and decisive, not just reacting to every little thing. From there, it requires real, meaningful reforms to rebuild trust in institutions, smart investments in the country's young people, and finally, a collective buy-in to a culture of disciplined, responsible citizenship.
You know, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? 2025 was an incredibly difficult year, no doubt about it. But what the country learned is that difficulty and defeat are not the same thing. In the end, the struggle itself and the reflection it forced on everyone became a catalyst for real growth.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. We live in an age that seems to reward outrage, where the loudest voice often wins. But maybe, just maybe, our greatest, most powerful strength is something much quieter: the disciplined ability to stop, to reflect, to learn from the past, and to build something better.